Hello everyone, this is Dr. Mohammad Saim Khan again. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Commerce, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh, and in this video we'll be discussing about the impact of events. So to begin with, we'll be having the impact of events on host communities, impact of event tourism on different industries, and then we'll conclude. So there are always lots of impacts of events on host community, and these impacts are usually both positive and negative. However, it is the responsibility of the event's organizer or managers to try to keep the positive impact higher than the negative by identifying and predicting beforehand these impacts, and then trying to manage them so as to arrive at the best results for all the parties involved, which in turn gives overall positive impacts. One way of achieving this goal is to develop and maximize all the foreseeable positive impacts and counter potential negative impacts. Proper planning, which involves awareness and intervention, should be engaged in order to address these possible negative impacts. This will therefore help the event manager to achieve a positive balance sheet and thereafter communicate it to the various stakeholders, which will at the end result in the overall success of the event. When discussing about the impacts of events, more emphasis is often placed on the financial aspects, probably because it accounts for the justification of the budget goals and expenditure. However, the triple bottom line of social, economic, and environmental measures should not be underestimated because government policies commonly acknowledge them. For instance, social and cultural benefits play a vital part in the calculation of an event's overall impact. Underneath are the major impacts of events on a host community, and these impacts will be discussed from both the positive and negative aspects. So, let us first discuss the social and cultural impacts. Society and culture are two concepts that can hardly be separated. While a society is a community or a broad group of people who have common traditions, institutions, activities, and interests, culture represents the practices of a society. Its customary beliefs, social roles, and material objects that are transferred or passed down from generation to generation. In this context, therefore, the potential effects or impacts of events or tourism as a whole on the culture of a society are major concerns for the host community, event managers or organizers, and other stakeholders in the event industry or tourism industry. This is because events often attract visitors or outsiders into a host community or a society, and then there is a possibility that the society can be influenced by changing its culture. People coming from different backgrounds, different culture, they're bringing their culture with them, right? And if they are behaving a certain way, your own culture might get impacted. So, tourism, which generally involves events, can be a source of conflict between host communities and visitors in destinations, where it can lead to perceived and actual impacts. At some point, the host community's attitude is one barometer to measure its ability to receive tourists, and the impact is a function of the interaction between them. And it is dependent on some factors. Some of these factors could be the nature and the extent of social and cultural differences between the tourists and the host community, the ratio of tourists to the host community residents, etc. Yeah, now impact of host communities on like the political impacts. So, in managing any event, government policies have an important role to play in order to actualize the goal of the event. Policies have to be taken into account before planning and hosting events, as different events have different policies governing them. For instance, there are regulations involved when planning an event where there has to be public disturbance, environmental pollution, erection and staging, etc. Politicians in recent times have realized the ability of events to raise the profile of their cities and states, as events normally gain media coverage and at the same time attract visitors and increase economic benefits and job opportunities. Therefore, they have become major key players in bidding for hosting and staging major events. Uh, Events can be hosted for many political reasons, and their management and marketing are usually influenced by politics. In mega events, the dominant power in society seeks to showcase and reinforce its values or to gain support. Event begin an image making tool event being an image making tool gives political propaganda the opportunity for their unpleasantly loud and noisy messages. When an overtone occurs, events can lead to manipulation or control over media coverage, either to hide or highlight the truth. An example was the political overtone that happened in Nazi Germany when Hitler used the Nuremberg rallies to stir up nationalism and to promote aggression. This, therefore, means that the emotional powers behind events can be used for both political good and evil by way of mesmerizing the crowd and provoking deep emotions. Next we'll talk about environmental impacts. So, one way of showcasing the unique characteristics of a host community is by hosting events during which the real properties of the destinations is pointed out. A lot of environmental impact assessment should be carried out and considered before hosting an event. Some of the major things to keep in mind when hosting a rather large event is the venue, because the impacts will be more if the event is not held in a suitable, proper built venue. For example, in a stadium, sports ground or entertainment center instead of a park, town square or street. In most cases, there are always more negative environmental impacts on a host community than positive, especially when there has not been enough study, assessment, and measures put in place on how to curtail these impacts. Impacts like crowd movement and control, noise pollution, excess in parking, and most rampantly, waste disposal. The environmental impact of event tourism on a host community or destination actually starts right from the planning stage to the assessment stage of any event. In order for any destination or host community to be able to provide service to visitors, they first have to develop the necessary infrastructures to support these services. This is because infrastructure is the underlying factor or basic framework. For major events like the FIFA World Cup, infrastructures like stadia, roads, welcome center, rental facilities, and hotels have to be put in place. And in developing these infrastructures, they will impact on the environment negatively on the initial state, but positively in the long run. But in order to minimize these impacts, there should be good designs and planning. For instance, the use of underground lines for utilities, can retain the more natural look of vistas. After these infrastructures have been put in place, another detrimental impact that can occur to environment is the substantial increase in the number of people using them. They could be they could be simple impacts like increase in traffic, crowded parks, but might be severe enough to cause harm to a fragile environment. And next, tourism and economic impacts. So the main driving force for event tourism and for tourism development as a whole is the economic benefits derived from it. Exactly. Although an international tourism activity is easier to measure than a domestic tourism activity, There are often economic benefits associated with the two categories. Depending on what? Depending on the magnitude and nature of the event being hosted. Events can impact on a host community through various means, examples of which could be in form of foreign exchange earnings, income and employment generation. The expenditures by tourists can be as real as any other consumption, and international tourist expenditures can be seen as an export from the host country, while domestic events can be seen as an export from the hosting region to the other local regions. This is somehow the most important impacts event organizers and host communities most look at from the positive side. Whether or not the budget will be enough to host the event, and at the end of the day, if the event will result in a surplus or profit or not, is always the greatest concern for event organizers and host communities. Tourism revenue to host communities normally accounts for a large portion of the total revenue that is spending at the event, either on travel, accommodation, goods and services by tourists, especially external visitors. So, as we were just, discussing the tourism and economic impacts. So, I'll take it a bit further and we'll discuss the impact of event tourism now on different industries. Economic impact. So, the rolling impact of an event touches every part of the tourism industry. We'll see to it. Okay, very first we have the hotel industry, right? Look, accommodation is highly in demand for any event. Whenever there's an event, people do need accommodation. So it is usually not just locals who attend an event, unless it is something very like small scale, like a village fair, which does not generate event tourism per se. But for football games, music festivals, and so on, hotels and Airbnbs and the other options in the surrounding area get booked up super quickly. Yeah. So the example I will use here is the Champions League final in Kiev, which is in Ukraine, in 2018. The hotels were like gold dust even before it was decided which two teams would be battling it out for the title. Prices were high, and people who had booked before the location of the final was actually confirmed, like example, people who were visiting Kiev for other reasons, saw their booking cancelled to make way for football fans traveling from Liverpool and Madrid, right? Because they are ready to pay a much higher price than those people who have already booked their rooms. So this was obviously beneficial for hotel owners. It was also beneficial for locals in Kiev, however, who were able to open up their homes as temporary accommodation for traveling fans. And whenever you have an event somewhere, the locals, if they have any kind of accommodation facility in their homes and all, so it is very beneficial for them. It is boosting the hotel industry in this way. Next, I would like to talk about the transport industry. The transport is affected in that when an event is taking place, there are a lot more people traveling to and within the area via public transport. Obviously, not everybody have a commute, a private commute. Okay, so they are going to use the public transport. So if we take the specific example of Oktoberfest, it's a fest in Germany. Okay, it's an annual beer festival. We can see that flight prices to these areas are more expensive in the lead up to it. Okay, so on top of this, trains within the area are getting booked up already, and smaller local public transport, which can't be booked in advance, will see a busier than normal time. Okay, it stands to reason that when an event is taking place, people will use public transport, especially if there is little or no parking at the venue. Events, they create congestion, which is one of the negatives. But talking about this Oktoberfest also creates a lot of revenue for hotels, bars, restaurants, and shops. Okay. Now we'll talk about the hospitality industry. So, working in hospitality is often a thankless job. And during large events, it can be even more difficult as bars, cafes, and restaurants fill up with the visitors. Using the specific example of the London Olympics in 2012. So, there were streams of visitors to the city who each spent an average of around £1,300 during the Olympic periods. Restaurants, cafes, and food outlets were full of tourists. There were people. Many wanted quick service, and there were, of course, foreign languages for the staff to contend with. All in all, jobs seemed harder during this period, but there was not actually an increase in revenue. Okay. So the games were, however, a big deal for tourism generally. The visitor number were up by 2.63 million and visitor spending reached a whopping 1.9 million pounds, billion pounds. This has had a lasting impact over the past decade with visitor numbers remaining high. And next we'll move towards the advertising industry, of course. Event tourism brings with it a lot of marketing. So when there's an event, it needs to be advertised. Let's take, for example, the annual music festival, Coachella. So this is big business with visitors coming from worldwide to enjoy seeing their favorite artists in sunny California. So like any festival, however, it needs to be advertised. So a lot of their marketing is digital, primarily across Instagram and Twitter. Even on other platforms, you're going to find it. So, however, this still costs money and people are employed to do this across different levels. From the people who write the tweets to the staff at Twitter itself. Other marketing like posters, billboards, and so on have costs involved too. Whether it's a page in a magazine or a slogan on the side of a bus, event tourism undoubtedly has it. So, to conclude, so we very first discussed the impact of events on host communities. What are the, what kind of impacts event have on the host communities, positive, negative, when people are coming from across different areas. They are bringing in their culture, they are bringing in their way of life, they are dumping wastes and all. So these were, and there were political impacts and there were economic impacts. So when you look at the economic impacts and the positive it is bringing, then the negatives are sidelined. But in order to be, when you are the policy maker, it is very important to kind of manage it. If the negatives are more than positives, then this event tourism or any kind of tourism, it's not doing good. Okay, in the long run, there will be worst consequences. So it's again very important to balance it, to manage it. And next we moved forward and we discussed impact of event tourism on the different industries like the hotel industry, the transport industry, the hospitality industry, and the advertising industry. So whenever there is, any kind of event in that area, these industries will be affected. They are going to have a very nice positive impact. Okay, people, for example, we discussed what hotel owners are going to face, and not just hotel owners, even the people with accommodation, local people, they open up their homes and their stays for tourists, and they earn a lot of money on this. So these impacts we had discussed in this video, and these are the references for this particular video. Next we'll move on to other aspects of event management. Thank you, have a nice day.